Welcome back to CrimsonCast, ladies and gentlemen. Galen Clavio and Scott Caulfield are both joining you after really the first truly feel-good moment of this IU basketball season, still basking in the afterglow of IU's 80-77 overtime victory against Notre Dame yesterday. We were both in the building. I don't have
wearing hockey jerseys.
Yeah, we were both wearing hockey jerseys, which was kind of an odd coincidence. I don't have a whole lot of a voice left today because I was in the top row of the arena and was trying to make the officials hear me from that vantage point. I really probably overdid it a little bit as far as the yelling was concerned, but the cause was sufficient, as it was really just an exciting game all the way around. IU with a lot of fight in this contest, and even though the game looked like it had been lost on a couple of occasions, they managed to figure out a way to come across with the victory. Scott, we came into the season not knowing what quite to expect. I think that the season started off a little bit slower, and we kind of all got used to this idea that, okay, this team really may not be that great. This kind of seems like, sunlight kind of poking through the clouds for the first time, where you're like, wow, this team went up against a bona fide top 25 team on a neutral floor and ended up coming away with the victory. That's something that we can easily celebrate, I think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think this season has been interesting because I think that Indiana State loss really took a lot of wind out of the sails. I wasn't at the game, but I was talking to people who were, and they said, the crowd was amped up, first game, Archie, and then, we just get our doors blown off by Indiana State. And then, I think some people got it back for Duke, but everyone kind of realized what Duke was going to be. And even at that game yesterday, the crowd was a little more tepid than normal. And, I just think that Indiana State game took so much wind out of the sails. And I think this game put it back in. After that game, people were literally. Now I was wearing the hockey jersey that has the stripes on it, so it was a pretty loud outfit. But I mean, I had three different guys come up and hug me and grab me on the shoulders. These people I didn't know who were just you baby, Hoosiers. And it's you just felt I feel like this kind of puts the wind back in the sails.
Yeah.
And it feels like this. I mean, it's obviously his first big defining win for Miller, but it does feel like this kind of buoys the team a little bit more. And I couldn't help but think, I don't think we're going to go on the same type of run, but it is interesting that 2 years ago, the team was completely DOA, falling apart. People were booing. And then, that team beat Notre Dame in the Crossroad Classic and really used that as a stepping point to win the Big Ten title. Not saying it's going to happen this year, but I think this is a kind of win that'll propel us to a better season. It was good all around.
No, I think you're absolutely right. There always needs to be some kind of a breakthrough in a season where you can kind of point to it and say, "Wow,
breakthrough! Are we taking football again?" So it was in Michigan. I'm just kidding.
Wow, let's not bring the mood down. Come on, no. But no, look, there needs to be a point where the team, not so much the fans. I mean, I think certainly the fans are who we deal with the most here, but for the team. We've seen this from this IU team over the course of the year where, against Duke, they play well for 35 minutes and then things start to not go their way. And you can kind of see the slumping of the shoulders, the body language gets bad. I mean, it's hard. I mean, players aren't robots. They're human beings. They have emotions. And, to play hard and to do the best you can and then to, then suddenly see things getting away from you. And in many cases, as we've seen this year, result in a loss. That's a hard thing for you to take, I think, as a player. And so you really do need, I think, to have the reinforcement of a game where things do go your way, where, maybe you win a game you're not supposed to, you win a tough game against a top-level opponent, and all of a sudden it's wow, okay, we do know what we're doing here. I think that's a really important aspect, and I think pointing to 2 years ago is a great example. I think going all the way back to the 2011-2012 season, IU winning that road game at North Carolina State in the ACC Big Ten Challenge was another example of a game like that. We're going to go in depth, talk about our observations from this game. We'll get into some statistical stuff. We've got a lot of comments from people on Twitter. We've also got, I think, a couple of comments maybe coming in on YouTube as we are doing this live. For those of you who are listening after the fact, obviously get your questions in early, and you never know. But we're going to go through all of that, and then we'll certainly talk about the implications of this game moving forward as far as this team's destiny is concerned. I think a lot of people have kind of been pondering that. So let's just kind of start off and talk about the game itself. this was really a game where Notre Dame, if maybe didn't have total control of the game, but had significant control of the game for large stretches, and it was kind of an accordion type of game where it was close at the beginning, and then around about the 8-minute mark, Notre Dame started to go on a run. IU was up 14-13, and then within 5 minutes it was 28-14, and all of a sudden you're like, man, this is a bad sign, because it very much resembled some of the runs we've seen, earlier this season. The one that Michigan went on in the first half of that game, the one Louisville went on in the second half of that game, and
at that point, by the way, that I mentioned to my wife, like, we are down as many points as we've scored right now, which is like at 2-0. That's not bad. Like 28-14 is not good. And then we were stuck on 14 for a while. I was like, we're on pace to score 28 points this game. Like, it's not like, and that was like, I think we were at 14, like with like 6 or 7 minutes to go in the first half.
Yeah, no, the 17th point for this IU team was not scored until right about the 5-minute mark of the first half. And 14 had actually, if you want to get technical, they scored their 11th point at about I think 13:30 or so in the first half, and they only scored a grand total of 3 points between that and that basket that got them the 17th point. So it didn't look good. But this set a pattern that really lasted for most of the game. And, Indiana kind of came back at the end of the first half. They got back within 6, and they scored the first bucket of the second half. And suddenly they're back within 3. I think they got it back to within 1. And then all of a sudden the lead balloons again. And suddenly it's 44-31. And all that happened within the span of, like 4 minutes. It happened very quickly. And then IU gradually chips away. They managed to get it all the way back to, I think, 51-49, and then Notre Dame extends the lead again, and then it's 59-50. And I was worried when IU got to that point. That was at about the 6-minute mark. 56-49 was the score. It's a 7-point margin, and I'm like, well, I just don't know if this IU team, with the shooting issues that they've had, is really equipped to do this again. And certainly the lead ends up getting back up to 8, and at one point, and for those of you who don't dig win probability, you can just like mute your volume right now. But Notre Dame at about the 2-minute mark of the game had a win probability of 98.7%, which was the 11th highest win probability in 2018. That was excuse me, though, that was the for IU, the fact that they won with that low of a win probability, very unusual. And from that point, though, the Juwan Morgan show started to happen, and it had already been in effect. And for IU to be able to come all the way back, get the game tied, and then really kind of struggle again in the second, in the overtime period, in terms of, they let Notre Dame get back up by, I think, 4, and the win probability went south again, and then were able to come back and obviously get the victory at the end. I mean, it really showed, not a resilience per se, although that was certainly part of it, but the ability to execute in that period of time. We hadn't really seen IU even have a chance to do that, in any of the games they played so far this year, whether it was Louisville or Duke. Those games had kind of gotten out of hand by the point where, with 3 or 2 minutes to go, you could really make baskets and make plays. And so really a tip of the cap to the players that were on the floor during that stretch, because they did something that they hadn't had the chance to do up to this point, and they did it quite well.
Yeah, I mean, the end of the game was like, it was an odd game because, you go back to some of the big signature wins, like, us beating Kentucky or Ohio State that one year when they were both ranked, 1 and then 2. I mean, at least in the Kentucky game, you had that moment where, like, there's a timeout, you're down by 2, and you start thinking, like, well, if we hit a 3 here, like, this was one of those few games where I kind of left, and it was like, I still can't believe we won. Like, it happened so fast. Like you mentioned, like, we were kind of trying to get in there. I always felt like we couldn't kind of break through that 3 or 4 point barrier. Like, we get within 4 or 5, and then, we get a score, then they would score, then we kind of get stops, and we take bad shots. And at the end, it was like just boom. Like, we just like haymaker, like 3 different punches, and obviously the rebound and the dunk. And it's like, I still kind of can't believe that we won, because there wasn't even a time during the game I was processing, like, this is how we're going to win.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Matt Blaskett points out in the YouTube chat, he can't recall a game in his IU fandom tenure, which is 7 years, where IU never really led for the last 37 minutes of the game and still won. And I think that there's something to be said for that, because it really was a game where IU always looked like it was, couldn't get the ball, rolled completely up the mountain. And the fact that they were actually able to do so and send it to overtime and then, get almost, right behind the 8 ball again in the overtime and be able to finally make it happen at the very end. That is a very unusual scenario from what we've seen out of this IU team and this IU program over the course of the last decade or so.
Yeah. Can we dig into Juwan Morgan now?
Yeah, no, let's do it. Juwan Morgan.
So I went back and rewatched.
Can I set his stat line first? Because I just think it's a thing of beauty that needs to be acknowledged. On the game, he played 40 minutes. He was 13 of 17 from the floor, 8 of 11 from the free throw line. He had 11 rebounds, and he scored 34 points, which was a career high. Obviously, the MVP of the game. Offensive efficiency.
Are we sure about that?
I think we're pretty sure about that. Offensive efficiency rating of 1.3. So, every time he used a possession, he was doing something positive with it, basically. I mean, really just a great performance out of him.
Yeah, I mean, so I went and rewatched the game when I got home, or at least watched the end. And I kind of paused. I got to the end, and it was about 3:50 to go in the game. They showed Juwan Morgan's stat line. He had 14 points and 6 rebounds. And I know he scored 20 of the last 24 points, but I'm even more amazed that in the 4 minutes, in basically 9 minutes of play, when you take the 4 minutes of regulation and the 5 minutes of overtime, he had 20 points and 6 rebounds. That's just an insane stat line just in a 9-minute stretch at the end of the game. And I know it was a majority of IU's points, but that kind of boggled my mind because I knew he was over 30 at the game. I knew at 34, and when I just kind of rewatching it and seeing he only has 14 points, there's 4 minutes to go, and then it's just we just fed him every single time. No, he was stellar. I mean, his offense was great. The thing that I was most impressed by was, we'll talk about the officiating too, which I think, I'm not a big officiating was garbage guy. The officiating was garbage, but when Morgan got his 4th foul in overtime. And then he didn't get that 5th foul, and he very easily could have. Colson was 2 or 3 plays. He just cleared out going up against Morgan and just driving it in, obviously trying to get that foul. And Morgan didn't get. To me, that was almost the hidden key of the game, is that Morgan didn't get the 5th foul when basically the refs were calling any kind of touch. And it's not like he hit. I mean, literally, there was 2 or 3 times Colson had Morgan on him and just waved everybody off. And I was I'm going to back this guy down and get the foul. And Morgan never fouled.
Well, and I'll tell you, and even not a greater key, but a similar key, there was the play, I think there were about 4 minutes left, where there was obviously a foul that Notre Dame committed as Juwan Morgan was going for a rebound. They didn't call the foul. They called it out of bounds on Morgan, and Morgan was injured. And actually left the floor. Deron Davis had to come in, and I think Tim Garl took him back to the locker room, and then he managed to come back out. And whatever he did, it was bad enough for him to have to leave the playing surface for a while, and then he still was able to come back and do everything he did in those final few minutes, even with that, whatever that injury was. We never really heard much more about it. At least I haven't read about it. So, there were a lot of things, whether it was him not picking the foul up or him being able to recover so quickly, that allowed that end game scenario to happen the way that it did. And it's a darn good thing, because I don't know. I don't think IU gets probably within 8 of Notre Dame if A, he's not able to execute the way that he's able to execute, but B, if Archie Miller, isn't so prescient to say, you know what, we're just going to go to him every single time. I mean, we commented as the game was going on. It's well, man, Juwan Morgan scored 14 straight points. He's scored 18 of the last 20 or whatever it was. And it's no one else seems to want to score. And I think that, I don't think that was the case. I think there was an obvious mismatch that we were able to exploit with Morgan in the post. And Morgan's natural ability, his footwork, just made it so that was easily the most reliable option every single time down the floor, including, that possession at the end of regulation where we're down 2. Normally, and I said this at the time, I was we probably should go for 3 here. You got Rob Johnson, you've got Devontae Green, you got some guys that can hit from outside. Go for the 3, because you're probably going to at least get an open look if you can get some ball movement. But instead, they came right out. They went right at the defense, and it was Juwan Morgan able to make the play. So Yeah, really just Morgan, I take my hat off to him. I mean, not just for this game, but for the season as a whole. He has really demonstrated some things that I didn't anticipate. I mean, I thought that he had some talent, certainly had some injury issues last year that kept him out. But, the amount of potential that's been unlocked in this guy since practices started in the spring until now, I mean, it's a remarkable metamorphosis. We had a question from Jay Horry on Twitter. What former IU player does this version of Juwan Morgan remind you of? To me, he's a shorter but stronger Jared Jeffries. That was Jay's response. And then we had another one of our listeners, Derek Collins, respond to that thread and say, mobile forward who can play center, not a great shooter. I'm going with Daryl Thomas. What's your...
Yeah, it's a great question. I would almost go with like a shorter Alan Henderson. Maybe not as much rebounding, but kind of a shorter Alan Henderson. Just somebody who plays around the basket. And that's the thing. It's weird seeing him play now because in today's basketball, it's like he should be stretching the court and popping threes. Like, Deron Davis, we get like he looks like a big post guy in the post mold. Like Juwan Morgan in today's basketball should be playing a different position, but he plays so down low. That's a great question. I think I like your Jared Jeffries the best. Although Jared,
it wasn't mine. That was Jay's. That wasn't me. But anyway, go ahead.
But I think Jared had more of an outside game than Juwan does.
Yeah, no, I think that's the case. I mean, I think that you could make an argument that Brian Evans might be a decent comp as well. In terms of, Evans was certainly a better outside shooter, but Evans did a lot of work down low, and was able to, generate a lot of, I think sometimes we think back to, what he was doing on the floor. I mean, he was, getting 5 or 6 shots up a game from inside his senior year. So I don't know. I think that there have been players in that mold. I think the Daryl Thomas comp is a really good one because of the leap. Because Daryl Thomas as a junior was there some games and he wasn't there other games. And there wasn't a lot around him in the post. I mean, he had Andre Harris that year, I think was the only other like regular post player. And then his senior year, suddenly he's really got this dynamic footwork. He's really able to work in and around the basket. He wasn't the most physically imposing guy, which I think kind of matches Juwan Morgan, but he was able to use his body in ways that kind of belied his physical presence. So I kind of like that one.
Now, before I want to dive into the end of the actual game, but you mentioned about, the mismatch and them continuing to go to Juwan Morgan. When you read the comments from Mike Bray's reason for basically not double teaming him was, I just didn't want to lose on 3-pointers. Like I knew the only way IU could beat us was hitting a bunch of threes. And part of me is like, did you watch any tape of this team? Like,
yeah, I thought the same thing.
Scared of hitting threes. Like, oh my God, not Josh Newkirk, 28% from 3. Like it was really a kind of just a dumb comment to say that. Like, this guy's torching you on the inside. I would much rather, like, I feel better double teaming and give me all the Robert Johnson threes you can if I'm Notre Dame.
I mean, I think in the macro, unquestionably, those comments didn't make a lot of sense out of Mike Bray. In the micro, you have to think about the way the game had played out. Robert Johnson, while he had a really bad first half, did end up 5 for 10 from 3 on the game and really seemed to have found his stroke. Leaving him open on the outside probably wasn't a palatable option. Colin Hartman had hit a couple of threes by that point. It was certainly something I could see them being concerned about. And I think they probably thought, well, we can handle Juwan Morgan down low. Ultimately, we'll be able to take care of that. I mean, keep in mind, this is not a Notre Dame team that is particularly big. I mean, Colson's only 6'6". He's shorter than Juwan Morgan. Gebbin's 6'10", but he didn't do very much in the game, only played 23 minutes. And the guys they're bringing off the bench, I mean, John Mooney, DJ Harvey, I mean, these are not people that are really going to be able to run at Juwan Morgan. I think they're worried that IU is going to score every single possession. And you're probably going, if you're up by 8 or 9 at the end of, with 5 minutes to go in the game, you're like, well, are they going to really beat us if all they're doing is hitting twos? And in this case, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. But the end of that game, I do wonder if, Juwan was doing really well, but we had held the ball. Like, we run a play, which basically gets Juwan scoring and leaving 13 seconds on the clock. I wonder if that might, looking back, had Farrell hit one of those 2 free throws, we would have looked back and said we left too much time on the clock for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I thought about that too. And I think I was worried about it as soon as the shot went up. I was like, man, I don't know about leaving 11 seconds. I think, though, the philosophy there is, well, we need to score.
Yeah.
And if we're running a guy to the post and he gets fouled and then the shot gets blocked out of bounds and then he hits a free throw, we're going to need some additional time. So the idea that it's an all or nothing last second layup sort of thing, it's funny. Normally, officials are not going to call a game-deciding foul on a post possession with like a second left. They're going to let the game play out. And so I'm sure Archie Miller's thinking, well, I don't want to leave it to, a heavily physical confrontation in the post where, Juwan Morgan maybe gets just absolutely bodied out and is able to get a good shot up and nothing gets called. Of course, ironically, they end up calling one of the most bullshit calls I think I've ever seen in college basketball with 1 second, like 0.8 of a second left on the other end. Unfortunately, Notre Dame missed both free throws, but I have to think that was the philosophy that they're just, he's like, we can't afford to not score here because if we get it down to the end and then don't score, then we lose the game.
And I'll give credit where credit's due. Like, I actually really liked that play Notre Dame ran at the end. Like, that was a well constructed end of game play. It looked like it was going nowhere for a second, and then it put together nicely. And yeah, that was a horrible call. But my God, like I've been to a lot of games at Bankers Life, all the Crossroad Classics, a lot of Pacers games. Like, that was pretty freaking loud for that second free throw. And I mean, that was one of the biggest, like, short arm, like, holy shit, I am not prepared for this moments. The second free throw, like, the first one was an honest miss, like, just kind of clanked out. That second one, like, the minute he left it, I'm like, wow, that was awful.
Yeah, no, I mean, and the kid hasn't hit a free throw all year. I think he's like a 43% lifetime free throw shooter. So, fortunately, things worked out there. But man, what a weird sequence of events.
When I was the coach, that would be called like somebody just shitting down their leg when they stay on the line. I mean, but dude, that's a tough situation to put somebody in. I mean, that's a tough make, especially when you miss the first one. Places going bonkers. Yeah.
A couple other things from the game specifically itself. We haven't mentioned him yet, and I feel bad about not doing so. But Zach McRoberts really contributed in ways that just don't show up very much on the stat sheet. This is a guy who, coming into the game, the most minutes he had played in his IU career had been 32 minutes, and that happened twice last year. And one of those was a 3 overtime game where he was, I think, just from foul purposes, had to be in there. But 31 minutes off the bench, he scored 1 point, but he just didn't make many mistakes. He got
tons of rebounds,
2 incredible rebounds off of free throws over Colson, and ended up with 9 rebounds for the game, 3 assists, only 1 turnover, had a blocked shot. This is a guy at the beginning of the season wasn't getting minutes at all.
Scholarship right now just for that rebound.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where you look at that contribution and you look at the contributions he made throughout the course of the game. I mean, this is a guy, IU fans have always appreciated players who made contributions that didn't necessarily show up on the stat sheet, but the glue guy sorts of things that really make a team go. I mean, the famous example was Brian Sloan, who just went out and set screens for everybody. Never was an offensive threat, but that was his role, and that was something that everybody really loved to see. AJ Moye kind of had that, where he was not. He wasn't going to be your first or second or third scoring option, but he was going to grab rebounds, and he was just going to be a guy that made it very difficult for the other team to play.
And from the bottom of the bench to lead a team to a Final Four. Yeah.
Well, and even there, though, I mean, it's a little different because, Zach McRoberts, he's a limited offensive player, and he knows that. And the fact that he's able to stay within that shell and, get other people set up to do what they need to do. He's certainly not an unskilled basketball player, but he lacks the sort of thing that would allow him to be an everyday starter. But then you look at what he was able to contribute, and he was a far greater contributor than 3 of the starters that IU had on the floor. You can make an argument he was a greater contributor than 4 of the starters that IU had at the floor at the beginning of the game. And so really just a tremendous effort from him. It was a very important effort. As much as IU doesn't win without Juwan Morgan, they absolutely don't win without Zach McRoberts.
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, he was so good, and he did all of those plays. Like, he was just running around and getting rebounds all over the place. And like you said, obviously the last one, but he had another clutch rebound off a free throw, I think, at the end of the game. I mean, it's against Colson. It's amazing he's doing that
over Colson. Over Colson without fouling him, bringing the ball down, and then having the presence of mind not just to protect the ball, but also to dish it behind himself to Morgan, who had the presence of mind to notice and to cut. Yeah. I mean, really, and this is the sort of thing, this is the sort of basketball intelligence that, that I think the guys that are buying into Archie Miller's system and the guys that possess that sort of basketball intelligence, this is where we're really starting to see it exhibit itself. And, and I think Archie Miller, if we were doing like a 3 stars of the game thing, I mean, he would certainly deserve one of those 3 stars because of the way that he handled this game. I mean, you think about the scenario that IU had to overcome.
But before we get up on Archie, just one last Roberts thing.
Go ahead.
Down, just because he did do something twice in overtime that really freaked me out. Like, it was like they had called a foul or something, ball's going into the net, and he like 2-hand fists it, like pops it out. And he did it twice. And like, that's the only thing, like, these refs will call a tech on that at some point. Like, being the walk on, being like, I was really worried the second time I saw that. It's like, he needs to stop popping the ball out like when they stop play.
I hadn't thought about that, but it
wouldn't be out of the realm of these refs to be like, boom, just tee him up and like,
yeah.
Anyway, go ahead. I want to hear the Miller thing you're going on. Sorry.
No, yeah, okay. So if you think about what Miller had to overcome in this contest in order to actually get the victory, you're not only dealing with a game where you're playing a really good Notre Dame team, a team that won the Maui Invitational, and was able to pick up a win against Wichita State on a neutral floor. Certainly a team that's had a tremendous amount of success in the tournament in recent years, has a potential first-team All-American on their roster. But if you think about the way that the IU team played in this game, this was not a banner game for a lot of players. I mean, you go down the list. Josh Newkirk was basically a no-show. I mean, 9 minutes, no points, 2 turnovers and 5 fouls. He did pick up some rebounds, but that's really all that he did. And, to have a senior point guard just give you nothing. I mean, 2 fouls in the first minute or 2 of the first half, and just never able to really contribute throughout the course of the game. So you got that. You had Al Durham, who was struggling to make the sorts of plays that need to be made, and was taking things off the table to some degree as the game was going along.
He looked like a freshman.
Yeah, he did. And you're going to get that. I'm not criticizing him.
It's not a bad thing. He just did. Yeah.
Right. Deron Davis, who I think, this is becoming a pattern with Deron. Deron really gave IU nothing throughout the course of this game, to the point that, like, Archie
playing at the end of the game. I was curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I don't think that Archie could have played him at the end of the game. I mean, he just gave us nothing. And it was really disturbing and, kind of disheartening to see that, because we've certainly seen Deron Davis have some monster games. I mean, he was absolutely the reason that IU stayed in the Louisville game as long as they did, even though, he didn't play tremendously more minutes in that one than he did in the Notre Dame game.
Same with the Duke game.
Yeah, same with the Duke game. I mean, in the Duke game, he had 16 points in that one. He had 14 points against Louisville. He had 13 points against Iowa. But, it's fascinating. I think if you look at Juwan Morgan and you look at Deron Davis, I think, has more physical talent and more inherent basketball, like, next level talent than Juwan Morgan does. I mean, I think that he is, just physically so difficult to contain, but he really is not close to putting it all together yet. And so you're going to get games like this where, he's not even getting shots up. Like, whereas Juwan Morgan against, a not terribly physically imposing Notre Dame front line was able to maneuver around and get the shots up. Deron Davis, who should theoretically have an easier time of doing that, looked completely stymied. Yeah. And on top of that, he's not getting rebounds. He's
fouling too much.
Yeah, I mean, he committed just a couple of really not smart fouls. There was one in particular in the first half that just didn't need to be committed. And, while he only ended up with 2 fouls in this game, it ended up just being another performance where you look at the talent that you got sitting on the bench there, and you're like, man, what would it be like if he was actually playing up to his potential at this stage? And look, it's a growing process. It was never just going to be about him getting in better physical shape. It was also going to be him understanding the game better. But you think about that from Archie Miller's perspective, you started 3 guys who in a 45-minute game gave you 18, 16, and 9 minutes and a grand total of 7 points. And you managed to win the game, despite, bringing a guy off the bench in Zach McRoberts who scored 1 point for the game.
Yeah.
And, I mean, all of that combined with the foul issues, combined with the bad officiating calls at the end, Archie hit all of the right notes down the stretch. And really, I mean, if you think about the substitutions that were made, if you think about, when he got guys doing certain things on the floor, the decision at the particular point to get Juwan Morgan as the primary offensive option every single time, it was really a masterclass, from Archie. And I certainly think this was covered. We saw Matt Norlander write about it. We saw Zach Osterman write about it. This is the sort of thing that having Archie Miller on the sidelines brings you. And it's it was fascinating to finally watch it succeed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we saw the strings being pulled in the Duke game. We saw them to some degree in the Louisville game. And in both of those games, the lack of shooting ultimately betrayed IU's ability to come away with the victory. The fact that in this game it didn't really does show you what the potential of not just Archie Miller and Indiana's program under Archie Miller is, but it really kind of uncovers what the potential of this particular team could be. If they can get down into that phase of the game where they can, make plays and make decisions that can help them, decide whether it's going to be a victory or not. I mean, I think that he certainly managed to outmaneuver Mike Bray in this game, and Mike Bray himself is a fine coach. So really, really strong performance on the bench. I think that with the limited array of weapons that he had at his disposal, he made the most of it.
No, I think that's a great point, because it's not like, I think it's fair to say outside of Juwan Morgan, everybody else, Robert Johnson had an okay game. I got a couple of Robert Johnson things to hit on, but everybody else, I would say this is pretty much not a great game for IU. It's not like we came in and just blew their doors off. It's not like we shot a blistering point from 3-point range. And then, our best player, Juwan Morgan, it was all 2-point shots. I mean, a couple and ones, but it's not like he was, killing it from behind the line. And, you're right. A lot of the starters didn't play well. I mean, you look at Dron Davis had 2 points.
Yeah.
It's like,
and Robert Johnson was basically a no-show until about the 3-minute mark of the first half. And he hit a couple of shots at the very end. He almost hit that 3 at the buzzer at halftime that went in. And he could have crawled into a shell and just been non-responsive the rest of the game. And I give Robert a lot of credit. He ended up with 20 points. He hit a lot of clutch threes. He pulled down some rebounds. He was able to dish some assists off. I mean, he really picked himself up.
Although we have got to get him with a tape measure and show him how far the court is, and be like, outside that line is lava. Like my 5-year-old's like, don't stay on the couch. It's lava. Like you can't. And he got for one. I mean, it was 3 different times, but one of them, I don't think it was actually out of bounds, but every time he kept going back to the same freaking corner, spotting up at the corner. It's like, hey, just take 2 steps in. You can't have 2 or 3 times where you catch the ball out of bounds.
Well, okay, to be fair, I mean, I think it happened twice. The second time I don't think was fully his fault, because it was a bad pass coming across the court, and he had to leap to bring it down. I mean, I have a hard time ultimately faulting him for that. I actually don't think he was out of bounds on that one either. I think his foot never came down on the line. The first one was absolutely his fault. And it's not the first time this season that we've seen kind of a lack of spatial awareness on the court. And that's something that, mistakes happen, but you have to not have that particular mistake happen. That is truly a wasted possession from a guy that you can't afford that from.
Right. But with all that said, I mean, back to your point, this is a team that, outside of Juwan Morgan and then, Robert Johnson for, 2/3 of the game, really didn't play that well. I mean, this wasn't a greatly played game by a lot of guys. A lot of guys who were playing kind of, McRoberts is definitely playing more minutes and not expecting to be playing overtime against Notre Dame on Fox in the Crossroad Classics. And so I'm with you 100%. Like, you have to give credit to Archie Miller. And I think the win here, it means so much because now, I do think this allows him to kind of say, look, like, it's not just, hey, we're going to get close from moral victories and we almost beat Duke and coulda, woulda, shoulda against Louisville. It's like, hey, you guys follow the system and you're going to win. And more importantly, you can now go to like Deron Davis, like, hey, Deron, if you follow the system, there's no reason you can't put up 34 and 11. Like, there's no reason you can't have the kind of game Juwan Morgan had. Like, to your point exactly, like, Deron, you have more physical talent probably than Juwan Morgan. Like, you put it together. And hey, like Freddie McSwain, there's no reason why you can't score 10 a game if you do. Like, it allows you to kind of go to all these guys. Like, everything I've been saying, you need to listen and believe and buy into.
Well, look, ultimately, it's the thing about this particular roster that I think is frustrating is that there are good component parts that just haven't played well simultaneously. And, the fact that they're able to get such a great game out of Juwan Morgan and nearly wasted it because they really didn't get good performances out of other people. I mean,
to be fair, one free throw goes down and this is a wasted performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I think is important to keep in mind. Now, look, I mean, the margins are always slim in basketball. You're going to have some games where it just goes your way and some games where it doesn't. But this has been a trend that we've seen out of IU over the course of the last, really the whole season, where, you look at the Louisville game, you get a pretty good performance out of Juwan Morgan, you get a pretty good performance out of Deron Davis, and Robert Johnson's a no-show. Scores 0 points in that game. You go back to the Iowa game, which was a pretty good game overall, for Devontae Green and Colin Hartman. And then you get a pretty good game out of Deron Davis and a pretty good game out of Juwan Morgan, and then the guards don't show up. It's just, this has been something that has been interesting to watch. And as the game was rolling along, I thought to myself, here's another situation where IU is going to let a game that was winnable get away from them because they couldn't get their players playing well simultaneously. And to be fair, I do not think that is an Archie Miller issue. I think that is a makeup issue of the players on the team. And it's something that if you want to put yourself in the Wayback Machine and think about what was the most frustrating aspect of the Tom Crean era, particularly over the last 4 seasons, it was that maddening inconsistency that and it wasn't just this group of players. We're talking about, 13, 14, 14, 15, there were just games and whole stretches of seasons where you just never got conjoined efforts from the players, and it was always hard to understand why. And I think we're still seeing that to some degree here. The fact that they've already started to get performances like this where they're able to come away with the victory despite that, shows that there's still some like ceiling potential on this team that hasn't been hit yet.
Yeah. Hey, at the end of overtime,
it
was funny because Colson, like when he got the ball and he's about to shoot, I'm like, well, that's perfect. That's exactly the one guy I want taking the shot. I mean, he damn near hit that. Like that thing rattled in and out. But I was kind of walking, and again, like that kind of led to that. Like I was still like, holy crap! Like I can't. Like it's just so insane that they almost hit that, but we still won. I kind of get the feeling that had that gone down when we go to double OT, I'm not sure we win in double OT. I mean, it's hypothetical, but I don't know. I felt like that would have been a pretty big backbreaker.
I mean, it would have certainly been emotionally difficult for them to deal with, but I don't know. I'm not sure that we necessarily lose in that scenario because you figure by that point, strangely enough, IU was probably they were in better foul shape, even though Newkirk had fouled out. And they had 2 guys. You're
still Morgan foul away from it just being done.
You are, but keep in mind, Farrell for Notre Dame had 4 fouls at that point. Pfluger had 4 fouls. Gebben had 4 fouls. Mooney had 4 fouls, and Colson had played 43 minutes by that point. Gibbs had played 42 minutes. I mean, I think that it would have been 50-50. I mean, I think the fact that IU was still in the game would have been enough to keep them going, and I think Archie would have figured out a way to keep them mentally in it. I don't see it being a situation where they would have just given it up. I certainly am glad we didn't have to find out.
Yes,
because that would have been. When he launched it, I thought, well, okay, that's going to be way off, and when it rattled in, I was like, oh my god. It was a heart-stopping moment. So yeah.
It was also nice going back to watch it and being like another piece of like, oh yeah, Gus Johnson's on this game. Like, that's awesome. Like, I was so fired up to hear Gus Johnson call this win too.
Yeah, it was excellent stuff. Anything else from the game in particular you want to check on before we get to some reader comments?
No, let's go to the comments.
Okay, a couple from Twitter that we haven't gotten to yet. Kind of starting back here. So this from a longtime listener and reader, Jeff at Gerb3X on Twitter. Going forward, what does this team need to do better in order to not have to come from 8 down inside 2 minutes? I think the answer here is
play less top 25 teams. I think part of it is Notre Dame's not a bad team.
There is something to be said for that. Yes, I think more to the point, they've got to find a way to get more offensive confidence. I mean, to me, that was what they struggled with a lot. Now, if the situation is they're going to just use Juwan Morgan as their offensive rock and then feed off of that, so be it. If you're going to have to play Zach McRoberts major minutes, and I say have to, I don't want it to seem like they're being forced to, but if his performance both in practice and on the floor during the game demands that he's in there, that does put more offensive pressure on the other guys that are out there. And so it really does become incumbent upon Robert Johnson, upon Devontae Green, upon Deron Davis to be able to score more efficiently and more effectively, and for IU to not get so bogged down in these offensive sets where they can't do anything. I mean, because what you're going to see happen once the Big Ten rolls around. I'm not too worried about the next 3 games from this particular perspective. I think there's other things to worry about with the next 3 games. But in the Big Ten, you're going to have teams that have the physical capability of locking Juwan Morgan down and keeping him out of the play. I mean, smart coaches will double team him, maybe triple team him in the post and dare everybody else on IU's team to beat them. Because at this point, if you take Juwan Morgan out of the game, I don't know that there's other players with enough offensive confidence to be able to consistently hit baskets and score the points needed to win. So this is where IU has to get more intelligent offensively. And so to go back to Jeff's question, they have to avoid these lulls where they just put up dumb shots. I mean, this is still a relic of the Crean era and the decision-making process that seemed to play out offensively with a lot of those games where a dumb shot was better than no shot. And there have been a couple of cases where they've gotten no shot off. I almost prefer that because a shot clock violation at least gives them time to go back down and get set defensively. Whereas the dumb shots, as we've seen, and I think that the guy that struggled with this the most has been Devontae Green. They get so tied up in that they don't then go back and play defense, and then they end up compounding the problem by giving up an open 3 or an easy basket, in the post. And so that's my big thing is there needs to be more offensive awareness and intelligence from the other members of this team beyond Juwan Morgan, because I think that ultimately that will be the deciding factor about whether this team continues to trend upward, is whether they can, because the defense has been good. I mean, you look at the way that they played defense for long stretches in this Notre Dame game, particularly the beginning 6 or 7 minutes of the first half, certainly down the stretch in the second half, and certainly in overtime. They were really able to take advantage defensively against Notre Dame, but their offense ended up letting them down too many times.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tangent off of your point, but I think it's a simple answer. They got to start hitting some shots, but I think at another level they have to get out of their own head. I look at Devontae Green as a perfect example. Near the end of the game, he had a play where he kind of wrapped around the lane, found himself open on the elbow, and
wide open.
Yeah, well, no, sorry, not that one.
Not the 3. Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm going to get to that. He wrapped around the lane, kind of got on the free throw line, found himself open, was kind of confused, just put up a really weird shot. I'm open, I got to shoot, and shot, and then he missed it. And you could kind of tell, it's all right, that was bad. I got to not do that again. And then, literally 2 plays later is when there was a rebound. Might have been Roberts, a rebound, kick out to Devontae Green right in front of the IU bench, wide open. And he kind of stutters and then passes off, which I watched that 3 more times. Archie Miller was just grabbed his head, shoot it. But I think he's in his head because he missed the last shot. It's I took a bad shot. And I think in a sense, they don't, for guys like Green and some of the other guys, just need to like just let it go, man. Just like get it out of your mind and just play basketball. And I feel like sometimes on the offense they just need to kind of just not think as much, as odd as that sounds, and just play. And if you're open, shoot. If you're not. But in the end, like they've got to just hit some shots, because like the thing is, Green, Robert Johnson, Hartman, they're all going to get a lot of good looks in the Big Ten, because at some point, Davis and Juwan Morgan are going to get doubled and triple team, like you mentioned, and they're just going to say, all right, Robert Johnson beat us. All right, Newkirk beat us. And those guys have got to either hit some open shots or learn to dribble and drive and kick and be able to get some points out of that.
Another question on Twitter. Let's see. Jordan Gusky from the IDS wants us to talk about Freddie McSwain. I don't know why Jordan's decided that he doesn't like us, but I guess we'll go ahead and dive into this for a brief minute. Freddie did not give us much in this game. Only 3 minutes, and I think had
starting my timer. We can't talk for more than he played. Like, we got 3 minutes to talk about Freddie McSwain. I refuse to talk to him longer than what he played.
That's fair. I don't know if you've noticed from watching the minutes, but Freddie's minutes have rapidly dwindled. As he played 23 minutes against Eastern Michigan.
That dunk against Duke is the highlight of the season. Like that is the Freddie McSwain high mark.
Yeah, he scored 10 points against Eastern Michigan. He had 2 points. The only 2 points were in that dunk against Duke. And he scored 2 points against Louisville in 9 minutes. Look, Freddie is not going to be capable of playing for Archie at this level. He might not have been able to play for him at Dayton. And that's not really a reflection per se on Freddie McSwain as from an attitudinal perspective. I just don't think he is a skilled enough basketball player to be able to do it. And look, this is, it's funny because when you look at the remaining roster that Crean left Archie Miller with,
got a minute 25.
There's guys like Freddie McSwain, or Tim Priller or Grant Galen, for the brief amount of time that he was on the roster, who just aren't able to measure up at this level. And, they were flyers, basically. They were recruiting flyers. A guy like Zach McRoberts is a little bit different because I think that McRoberts does these other things. Like he's not an unskilled basketball player. He just has one glaring hole in his game, unlike a Freddie McSwain, who just has a lot of glaring holes in his game. Right. And so, look, I think Freddie's going to have a third act here. I think he will play an important role in at least a couple of games in the Big Ten. I don't know which ones, but I don't see a situation where we're just never going to hear from him again. I just think against Notre Dame, against Louisville, against Iowa, not really a guy that you can have it on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not, he's going to have to learn. It's tough. He probably came in thinking, I'm going to be like, Deron Davis last year is going to be me this year, and then I'm going to move into that role like Deron did this year. And, that's where a guy like Zach McRoberts is great, because he understands what he needs to do to get playing time at this level, which is I'm going to do one thing really well, which is hustle and rebound. And in a way, Freddie McSwain kind of needs to do that. But I will say it is tough because sometimes on the, when you get him out there with McRoberts and some other guys, it's like there's nobody on the team who can shoot. But we've talked enough about. I agree with you. I think we'll see a third act for him, but I'd like to move on.
Fair enough.
Much more. At that point, we're now digging into a hole deeper.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's go ahead and jump to another question. This is from Bob Schaffner on Twitter. Biggest coaching criticism / negative from the first part of the season, and can it be improved for the remainder of this year? I'm going to let you tackle this question first, Scott. Biggest coaching criticism or negative from the first part of the season?
I mean, that's a great question considering we were so critical of our last coach. So it's tough. I mean, I would say that, the thing that is tough for me is I feel like we're getting a little more Robert Johnson and Josh Newkirk than I would like, even when they're having bad games. And I would like to see a little more maybe Devontae Green and Al Durham. I mean, that said, they're still playing Green and Durham a lot. And Robert Johnson brings you a lot on defense. And, to be fair, Josh Newkirk is a good, he can handle the ball fairly well most of the time. If I was going to throw it out there, I would say, probably on the guard play, I feel like I would like to see more minutes going to Durham and to Green and maybe a little less Newkirk. I would also be curious, Justin Smith has kind of seemingly fallen off the radar here for somebody who I thought looked really good early on. He seemingly has fallen off the radar. That being said, I'm not watching practice. I don't know what's going on there, but I don't want to be too Pollyanna-ish, but I mean, I'm seeing a lot of what I like, because a lot of the roster things, there are points where it's like, who else are you going to play? It's like, I don't want to see him starting Freddie McSwain, back to our last question. I think honestly, the coaching here, if I had to give it a grade, it's like an A- or an A. I mean, we're really splitting hairs if I'm looking at things I'm concerned about. I mean, in the end, when you look at this team, everything needs to be, taken under like we talked about the last time, taken under the comment of, I'm not sure this is a well put together roster. And
You're
Archie,
not sure? I'm very sure it was not a well put together roster.
And Archie didn't put it together. These guys are learning a new system, and there's not as much talent there as I think we all would have liked to have hoped. And this is a team that has continually gotten better game after game, and at least week after week. So to me, I don't want to just completely be a homer or a bandwagon guy, but there's not a lot of negative that I'm seeing. And the thing that I like the most is, Archie has been very kind of calm and calculated through all of this. Even after the losses, you don't hear a lot of great moral victory after Duke. Like, we're gonna, it's just kind of like, hey, we lost, we played well. Like, he's so even keel that I wonder if some of the players too are kind of waiting for some of those manic up and downs that they're used to. If you're a guy like Robert Johnson, it's like, this is really kind of a steadying influence. Almost feels weird that things aren't kind of nutty.
This almost feels supportive. I don't know what that is.
I think so. So I have a hard time answering that, because I've been very impressed with everything. But I guess if we're going to split hairs, I'd like to see more Durham and Green in the backcourt, and maybe a little less Newkirk. That would be my only beef.
Yeah, I can't even really find fault with that. I think his philosophy on those, I'm gonna defend the weak criticism that you put up here. I think his,
you better have something then. If you get to say he's great, then you got to give me something then.
I will give you something. But I think his philosophy has been, I got to let Robert Johnson shoot his way out of this slump. I got to let Josh Newkirk try to find his sea legs again. And when it comes to being a point guard, and I don't think there's any other solution, because if you put Al Durham in and you're playing a lot of Devontae Green, and you don't let those guys figure their way out, and then the guys that you are playing end up struggling, you've compounded the issue. It's kind of the Richard Lego, Peyton Ramsey argument we were having earlier this season with football. I think the one criticism I have, and look, from a coaching on court, I really have no criticisms at all, because I don't think. Well, look, we levied more than our fair share of criticisms at Tom Crean, but we really didn't start doing that until year 3. There was a tremendous cushion provided to Tom Crean, even taking into account the personnel level that he was dealing with in the first couple of years.
Go back and listen to the podcast. I wish people would do this. Go back to those first year or two.
The Egyptians deleted them all. Remember?
You go back, you can, bear with me. You and I, but I remember talking about I was really impressed with the game coaching of Tom Crean. He got Matt Roth open for 9 threes in a game where nobody, Matt Roth's the only guy who could shoot threes. We were running plays for Tom Pritchard. I was the early play calling Crean was good, and we were very complimentary. And you're right, it wasn't until really, year 4 or 5 we started to get critical because of things that we were seeing.
Right. So anyway, I think if there was one thing that Archie I would probably think want a do-over on, it's not quite realizing what the expectations of the fan base were coming into the year. As relating to what he had on the floor. And I get it. I mean, you're managing 2 different sets of expectations. You're trying to pump up a roster while simultaneously being realistic about what you can do, while simultaneously getting the schedule much more competitive than it had been, while simultaneously having all these people excited about you being the new coach. I mean, there's a lot to manage there. And it's hard to manage all those expectations and all the people that are in the mix, as it were. But I think that a lot of people came into the season thinking that IU was going to be better than they were right off the bat. And, that's about it. I mean, I don't think that his stance has really changed at all if you go back and read his words. And perhaps that's just a little naive of him. But that just also might just be who he is, where maybe he just doesn't care what the outside expectations are. I do think that ends up being part of the job of a head coach sometimes, is you have to manage those expectations even if you don't want to, because it does end up setting kind of an atmosphere around your program. But that's really it. I mean, I think we really need to get through this year before we can, really dive headfirst into, okay, how did this coaching go? What was good? What needed to be improved? So far, I've really liked what I've seen.
Yeah.
A couple other comments and questions. We had a comment on the actually a question on the Crossroads Classic from our good buddy Sam Story, who we got a chance to meet at Bankers Life Fieldhouse. That was a lot of fun. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah.
So his question: given the financial structure of the Crossroads, each team splitting the revenue equally, 25% across the board for each, do we believe that this is something IU should continue to pursue? There was an extension announced so that the event would going to go until 2021. But is Indiana making this happen at the expense of themselves? Butler benefits greatly from the event, but does Indiana? This year, of course. Other years, debatable. Best podcast on the internet. Thank you, Sam. We appreciate that.
I agree with that. Moving on.
No, but I mean, we talked about this. I had never been to the Crossroads. This was my first year in person. And I'll admit, I had a relatively negative attitude towards the Crossroads Classic coming into this year. Simply because, I think there was a big event that we didn't get a chance to play in, like a marquee sort of event that Michigan State keeps getting to play in because we're already every year committed to this Crossroads Classic event. And so, it's okay. It's great. We're playing Butler or we're playing Notre Dame, but we could play them out, outside of the Crossroads Classic. That would be fine. Is it taking things off the table? That was kind of my thought process. I really enjoyed the atmosphere. I'm not going to lie. I really enjoyed the evaluative process of, seeing the different fans and seeing the support levels and all of that. And it was cool kind of being in an environment where, there was a bunch of Indiana basketball fans who root for different teams in the building. And, in some years, all four teams are really competitive. In other years, it's maybe not all four of them, but it is cool. It's kind of a revival of, different ideas we've seen in the past, whether it was a state basketball tournament for college or whether it was the Big Four Classic, which used to run, which was Indiana, Notre Dame, Kentucky, Louisville. That was always a fun event. So I don't know. I didn't realize that was the financial structure, Sam. I appreciate you bringing it up because IU certainly had more fans there than everybody else. I mean, it was not close. As far as whether they're doing it at their expense and others' benefit, I mean, probably to some degree, but I don't know if that is specifically the reason why, if they're going to consider not doing it in the future, that they wouldn't. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and appreciate Sam. I didn't know the financial structures either, and if that's the case, Notre Dame's running to the bank because they bring like 12 fans every year, and so that little leprechaun's got a bag of money just driving back up to South Bend, laughing the whole way. I mean, here's the only argument that I would bring up about the Crossroads. I've gone every year. I love it for the same reasons you do. It feels like you kind of, I have this discussion many years. Like there's only, very few states could put together a tournament like this with that kind of talent. And by the way, Evansville and Ball State, who just beat Notre Dame, and they're on the outside looking in. Every year I think we've had a team that's ranked in this. So it's been a really good event. The only thing, I'll take it a bit of a different angle, if we want to build up this, a home and home with Arizona or the game with Kentucky, if we want to bring that back, I've seen articles about this. There's only so many weekends before the conference play starts that you have available for some of these marquee games and tournaments. And, you have the Big Ten ACC Challenge that we're in. Most of the stuff around Thanksgiving is already taken up. This next weekend it's kind of weird with Christmas, but it's normally finals. The weekend, there's only one or two weekends. And so, if you look at our schedule now, if we wanted to bring back the Kentucky game, let's say Kentucky said we want to play you this year, we don't even have a date to really put them in, because we played Michigan on a weekend, we played Louisville, we played this. So that would be the only thing that I would say is if we're going to get out, we have to be looking at scheduling marquee games. That said, I still like it. I think it's good for the state. And I would say this, we'd almost have to say if we don't do it, it can't happen. Because to me, the worst thing is if we come out to play Kentucky, but then the Crossroad Classic stay and they bring in Evansville, then I think it looks even – it's like then I'm even more bummed that we're not part of it. So I think there almost has to be a death pact where it's like if we're not doing it, it's not going to happen.
Well, I agree with that. And I think, the big kind of bellwether on this is how good is Butler. We've gotten used to Butler being a very, very good team. And, they were certainly an excellent team under Brad Stevens. And that was really when the whole thing got started.
They're the best team in the Crossroads. They're 5-2. Yeah.
Right. But
can they keep that up?
Yeah, can they keep that up? And I think the jury's out on the Lavelle Jordan hire. I don't know that that's necessarily going to be sustained. I mean, they should really have 4 losses by now. They had a miracle comeback against Ohio State. They're that game away from their best win being Utah at home.
And I went to that game, and that was Utah. Utah wasn't that great, but they still had a hard time kind of pulling away from them.
Yeah. So look, I think your point is well taken. The other thing to keep in mind is, IU needs to play in Indianapolis more than they do. I mean, the IU used to play 2 games at least a year in Indianapolis, and when you got
Classic,
to
the Indiana Classic, and
the Hoosier Classic was always in Market Square Arena. The Indiana Classic was always played in Bloomington, but the Big Four Classic would get played, I think, sometimes in the RCA Dome. It was still the Hoosier Dome at that point, but you'd play Kentucky or you'd play Louisville, but then you'd play the other team that you weren't playing in that, in a non-conference situation elsewhere in the schedule. But the idea that IU in Indianapolis is a thing, I think that has to be, we have to sustain that. We have to keep that going. You need marquee games there. I mean, I can remember IU Kentucky in Indianapolis a couple of years. I can remember IU Kansas happening, I think, in 1993. Those are really healthy games for the fan base. It's cool to get a marquee game in a big environment, whether it's Bankers Life or whether it's at Lucas Oil Stadium. That's something that we went away from largely in the Crean era. Then there were a lot of reasons. I, to a large degree, think that Crean was scared of those sorts of games. And the Crossroads was kind of like the one guarantee that we would actually play a game in Indianapolis every year. Our scheduling philosophy is much more robust now under Archie Miller. So perhaps the Crossroads outlives its usefulness for IU. Like, rather than, I think, and this is what Sam's getting to, rather than stage the Crossroads Classic and have Notre Dame and frankly Purdue freeloading revenue off of IU fans, why doesn't IU just play Notre Dame in Indianapolis and let Purdue schedule their own? I mean, for the Purdue people, they have a very good team this year, by the way. I think Purdue is, they are a dark horse, to knock off Michigan State and win the Big Ten title. That team deserves a better fan base than they've got right now. They were overwhelmed noise-wise by Butler fans who do not have a good team this year in pregame warmups. And those Purdue fans, it was like a muted trumpet the whole game out of Purdue, that first game. Yeah, I know you weren't there for most of it, but I was. And I wasn't surprised because I grew up among Purdue fans. I know that they're not really very loud fans by and large at games, unless they're playing IU. So that didn't surprise me, but it's like, again, I think IU could probably pull off their own individual high-profile event at Bankers Life without necessarily having to get those other teams involved.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Matt Blaska points out that the tournament I was referring to was the Champions Classic, which is that was the event that the Crossroads Classic has kind of kept us out of. Matt Zimmerman with some comments here. We'll take a couple more of these. Thanks for the Crean mention. His first 2 years, I wasn't interested in any kind of analysis, so we all knew it was a rebuilding job. I think that's a key point. And I think it's important to remember this is also a rebuilding job. Like, if it hasn't been laid bare to you as an IU fan already, that this is an incomplete roster, to put it as kindly as possible, then you're not really paying attention. With Archie, this is again Matt Zimmerman. With Archie, it's about the fact we no longer depend on shots falling. It's about his philosophy. Every positive result is gravy. He's building something that indicates what we will be going forward, though hopefully that does not include questionable free throw shooting. That's fair. I think the shooting thing, I mean, it's a bad confluence of events more than anything else at this point, and I do think that will get better. I think he's recruiting guys who are not just shooters but scorers. You look at the performances, and granted it's high school, but you look at the performances being turned in right now by, Robert Finney and Demizi Anderson and some of these other recruits coming in next year, and it's like these guys can put points on the board. Like, the scoring, I think, will become less and less of an issue. And when you combine that, hopefully, with guys that can also play very good defense, I think that those are going to be really important things. I think Archie knows exactly the game plan that he wants to execute long term with this IU team. It's just going to take a little bit of time to get there. And, the idea that you're just going to instantly overnight change the roster and immediately start, or not change the roster and immediately start playing, at a high level. I mean, that's just not really realistic.
Yeah, and another hidden value for next year is like you have Race Thompson just registering this whole year. I mean,
Yeah.
he's already into the system, which is great.
A couple other comments or question here from Matt Blaska. Do you think that it's going to get harder to go to Indy more than once a year, especially since IU is going to a 20-game Big Ten schedule? That's a good question. I mean,
If they keep the crossroads, I think yes. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not going to be, and I'm not saying get rid of the crossroads. I'm just saying if you have the crossroads, you have a 20-game Big Ten schedule, and then you still have, a couple. You try and do a couple other non-conference tournaments in the AC Big Ten. Like I'm not sure where you have room to get another trip to Indy.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing I could see if this Louisville series, hopefully it continues. I like when IU and Louisville play. I think it's a natural rivalry. If that goes, Indy 1 year, Louisville 1 year, Bloomington 1 year, and then recycles, there's opportunities to go to Indy. I personally believe, and I've gotten into arguments with people about this before, I think the Kentucky Indiana series belongs in either just in Indianapolis or an Indianapolis Louisville rotation, where you play it 1 year at Lucas Oil or Bankers Life, you play it 1 year at the Yum Center, and then you just go back and forth. I don't think it needs to be on campus. I think that a lot of the best games in that series have taken place on neutral courts, and I think that is, you want to get 40,000 people to go watch a basketball game, have Indiana and Kentucky play at Lucas Oil Stadium. It is, if you haven't been to one of those before, and I've been to like 3 of them. It's a really magical environment to watch basketball in, and it's something that I think you could fit that into your natural week or yearly schedule, and that would be another way to get Indianapolis games in there.
My dad and I went to every one of those games from like 89 or 90 to like 97 when we did Indy and Louisville. I mean, I remember once I was teaching in Texas, and I flew back to Louisville to go to the game at Freedom Hall with my dad. And I mean, and so I went to so many, I saw so many ass kickings. I remember one game, it was like, it was Neil Reed's like sophomore year or something. We played in Louisville. We played in Freedom Hall, and we just got our freaking doors blown off. I mean, I was the game where Damon Bailey had the great game, cover SI, and I can only echo everything you said. Like, I was actually, like, as odd as it sounds, I was a little bummed when the series went to Lexington and Bloomington, just because those games were so cool. I mean, it was like, it was a true neutral site every time, and it was even better at the RCA Dome or the Hoosier Dome, because you had 45,000 people, and it was great. Like, there was one section where it's like blue, the other section's red, and it's just like they were perfectly broken up. I mean, you are right. It was some of the coolest games I have ever been to. I wish they would bring it back, and I'm with you. I wish it would be in neutral sites.
Couple more things that we've gone a little over time here, so I want to wrap it up relatively quickly. Comment from Dr. Hoosier, from our good buddy Mike. I think the last time I got that excited for a close to a game was the missed layup and putback for the Big Ten title win at Michigan, which was 2013. The flashes of what our Archie at IU will provide showed yesterday, and I like what I see. And oh my, actual post feeds. Yeah, I echo all of that. Well, I'm trying to think, what was the most excited you got, like, for an end of game situation, the last time you got that excited?
Trying to think, that was a good one. Although, we didn't have Archie then yelling at half the Notre Dame coaching staff. Trying to think, I was pretty.
I've got mine. Mine is the end of the VCU game in 2012, the second round tournament game. Not that I didn't get excited at the end of that Michigan Big Ten title game, but that was just, that game was so there was a different vibe to it. It was a good vibe. It was like a gravy sort of vibe to some degree. That VCU game felt like life and death. This one felt a little bit like life and death. And that last 6 or 7 minutes when IU couldn't buy a bucket against VCU, and yet VCU wasn't scoring either, and then the last possession and Sheehy hitting the shot and everything like that, I just remember that being a really electric moment. It reminded me a little bit about the ending to this Notre Dame game.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty fired up when we beat Kentucky in the Sweet 16, like 2 years ago. I mean, the end of that game, I remember being in a bar before I went to a Pacers game, watching that one. That was good. And I mean, this all pale, that shot, Watford shot against Kentucky just kind of stands out. Like, that is still like my number one end of game moment. But this one was pretty dang close. I mean, this was not close, but this one was pretty, this was up there.
Final comment before we wrap things up. This one from Alex Johnson on Twitter. If Davis and Morgan prove they can be effective together, how far can this team go? Which I think is the larger question that people are starting to ask themselves. And this is something I brought up on my personal Twitter account yesterday, which is that the NCAA tournament is not a pipe dream for this IU team. As much as people have kind of written off the season, we said before this 5-game stretch, when we did our podcast leading into the Duke game, we said that this team needed to go 2-3 in that 5-game stretch in order to have a legitimate chance at going to the NCAA tournament. And they did that. And they got a win. I think they actually got a better win than I thought that they would. I thought if they were going to win a game, it'd be the road game at Louisville. Instead, they end up picking up a neutral court win against Notre Dame. That matters in the eyes of the committee. As far as where the Davis and Morgan thing comes in, that's really the key. It's not just Davis and Morgan. It's also Johnson and Newkirk. Like the starters have to give starter quality minutes. They have to give starter quality production, and they need to be doing that regularly. And then you need to be able to bring guys off the bench and have them do their thing. And I think maybe the starters end up changing. When Colin Hartman is finally healthy enough to start, I think we see him start. I think we see, Zach McRoberts getting more minutes. But I think that you hit the nail on the head, Alex, in terms of Davis and Morgan are going to have to be the core, because the offensive production is just going to have to come from in the post. I mean, that's going to have to be the engine that drives this thing. As far as how far they can go, if Davis is able to work it out, and I have some questions as to whether he will this season, if he can work it out and Morgan can continue this torrid pace that he's on, I mean, I think they can get to 20 wins. I don't think that like you think about the way that the schedule plays out. They've got 3 games left in the non-conference. The first one's on Monday. There's a letdown potential there because it's Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne's a decent team. They're around the same quality level as Indiana State. But if they can win that game, if they can beat Tennessee Tech, if they can beat a pretty putrid Youngstown State team, you're 9-5.
Let's be honest. They lose any one of those, they're not going to the tournaments. Let's just say we're 9-5.
Yeah, so you're 9-5. You're already 1-1 in the Big Ten. So if you can play above 500 ball, even by a game in the Big Ten Conference, there you're talking about 500 ball would be 8-8. So you'd be talking about 9-7. So now you've got a record of 18-12 going into the Big Ten tournament, and with a 10-8 Big Ten record, I mean, that's going to probably draw you a mid-level seed. You're going to be playing another team of a similar caliber. You pick up a win there. Now you're sitting right at the doorstep of 20 wins. Can they do better than that? Yeah. I mean, I think the big issue for this IU team is going to be, this Notre Dame game was very important because they managed to win a game outside of Assembly Hall. They're going to have a tremendous advantage in Assembly Hall. And you think about, Penn State and Northwestern and Maryland and that caliber of team coming into Assembly Hall, it's going to be a struggle for those teams to perform at a high level. The question is, can IU pick up wins on the road to compensate? Because they'll probably lose 1 or 2 games at home in the conference schedule just as a matter of course. But can you compensate for that on the road? That ends up being the big question. And I don't know the answer to that, but I still think that the ceiling on this team is 19, 20, 21 wins. I think that they can be that good if they start to get all their pistons firing together.
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to I think that Morgan and Davis have shown that, they're going to be the engine. I think one of those guys is always going to be doing pretty well. I think the key to this team is, are we going to be able to get the outside shooting to complement it so they're just not getting packed in, completely taken down. But I agree with you. And again, I go back to, this is something we're just not used to. This team is continually getting better. So the idea of us putting a little 2 or 3 game win streak in the Big Ten tournament is not illogical. I mean, this team is continuing to get better, and I don't want to bash the old organization, but, under Crean, the team's had kind of a history of plateauing right around this point in the season. Like, this is about when we saw the best team, and then maybe a little bit in the Big Ten, and then like February and March, kind of just, we either stay the same or we started to drop off. Now, the jury's still out. We'll see how it goes, but all I can say is up to this point, this is a better team than I think played Michigan. It's a better team than played Duke. It's a hell of a better team than played Seton Hall, and way better than Indiana State. Like, they're continuing to step up and get better over and over again. I don't see that stopping. And so I look at kind of the end of our season, after Michigan State, when we play them at home, which will obviously be a tough game, at Rutgers, home to Minnesota, home to Illinois, at Iowa, at Nebraska, at Ohio State. I could see us ripping off 6 straight wins. I mean, we could kind of be that team that we've never really been in a while, like that hot team in a big conference where, like, we don't quite have the wins, but everyone's like, damn, this team's coming on, win a couple games in the tournament. We get a, 9-10 seed just because we've ripped off a bunch of wins at the end of the year.
It'll be interesting. And again, I think it really comes down to a bunch of different pieces playing together effectively, consistently, and at the same time. And if IU can get to that point where they're just getting that sort of production throughout, as opposed to relying on one guy and then hoping other people break through on and off, that's going to be the key to unlocking the potential of this team. It's going to be interesting because, as you mentioned, it's a soft underbelly kind of, at the end of the regular season where, once you get past that Michigan State game, it's not that bad. And your three most attainable road games in the conference are also during that stretch. And that is the one thing I would say concerns me is this team has such a short rotation, and it seems to be getting shorter instead of longer. Do they wear out by the end of the season? So we'll see. But you know what? It's nice at this point. What they had to do, they did. They got the win against Notre Dame. They put themselves in a position to still be in the conversation for an NCAA at-large tournament berth. It would be a low seed, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. And that's about all you can expect from a team that's got so many huge changes that they're having to go through in this season.
If we make the NIT, are we going to sell our home game this year?
No. I bet we would like to have a home game.
I think we'd actually like a home game.
When you're not scared of your fans, it's amazing what happens. Anyway, so that'll wrap things up for us. We appreciate you indulging us, and we appreciate all the people who watch live. It's always a treat to have you folks chipping in on YouTube. For those who are listening in the recorded format, we hope you enjoyed the show. If you've got any questions or thoughts about IU basketball or IU football or anything else, you can always tweet us at CrimsonCast. We will do more live shows as Big Ten season gets underway. We'll have an update podcast next week, probably after the Tennessee Tech game and before the Christmas break or Christmas holiday, so that we can chat a little bit about how IU fared in those 2 games at home. Thanks to everybody for sending in questions and comments, and we'll be sure to keep up with IU basketball as we move forward here. For Scott, I'm Galen. Thanks for watching or listening to Crimson Cast, and we'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.